one of the marketing leads said to me, do you know, Robert, last year we made 50% of our new business target on 5 accounts. So, there's a complete disconnect between targeting 20,000 companies and making 50% of your target from 5 accounts. For my money, ABM is pretty much the go-to-market strategy. Why would you do anything else? Yes, let's understand the total addressable market, but then let's think about the accounts that are going to be most important to us, pick those off in manageable bite-sized chunks, and then think of the right ABM approach. For me, pilot is almost a dirty word. Of course you have to build the business case, and I'm not suggesting you literally flip a switch where your marketing budget is 100% ABM from day one. But I think if you're going to take this approach, it is a strategic go-to-market strategy. And the idea that you have a pilot with a couple of accounts or as you say, a quarter's worth of activity, it's just not going to fly. Typically, buying groups were sort of 10 plus, but the invisible buyers were about 50% of the buying group. And on that basis, if the salesperson never gets exposure to these people, it could be C-suite, could be procurement, could be other people sitting behind the scenes, then how do they influence them? And very often these passive or inactive buyers are people that they might not say yes, they might not be choosing the shortlist, but they're the people that say no.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the latest in this award-winning OnBase podcast series. I'm your host, Paul Gibson, and with everyone in B2B exploring strategies and GTM, etc. I'm excited that today I'm talking with Robert Norum from Propolis. And today we'll be discussing the importance of ABM being the core of any B2B company's GTM strategy. Robert, we go back many years, so I'm excited to get on this with you. Thanks for coming on to the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Paul. Looking forward to having a chat.
Absolutely. And so before we get into the topic, because it's always interesting, can you start with a bit of a walk through your journey, where you are today and your current role at Propolis?
Yeah, sure. So I normally kick off by saying I've been in B2B marketing for around 30 years. And I tend to cap it at that. Otherwise, I do sound terribly old. And obviously, we've known each other for a long time as well. In terms of ABM, I've been specializing in it for the last 13 years. I've worked with a number of leading agencies in the space. And for the last 5 or 6 years, I've worked as a completely independent consultant, giving advice to both clients and agencies. In terms of my relationship with Propolis, it started out with B2B marketing. I've been running their ABM Essentials training course for the last 7 years. We've had over 1,000 people, well over 1,000 people through that. And Propolis, which was sort of driven as an online community during COVID, has obviously expanded to be, really quite a large global B2B community. And my role there is as the ABM and demand strategy expert, as they call me. And that's really to provide advice and consultancy and training to Propolis members, who are all B2B companies spread across tech, professional services, manufacturing, all kinds of different industries.
Yeah, and I know Propolis well, again, from the B2B marketing days as well. And it's a great community and lots of really good advice as well. It's not a team of salespeople, right? It's a team of people who can really help you build out your understanding and use of all of these fantastic tactics and programs. So.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a team of experts who are all consultants in their own right. And then, of course, there's the community. And an awful lot of the power of Propolis is the fact that you're mixing with your peers and you're able to ask them questions and share experiences and ideas. And we run a lot of roundtables and discussion groups, both as live events and obviously online as well.
Yeah, excellent. So anyone who hasn't, definitely check out Propolis. A very useful community to be a part of. So you say you've been in B2B 30 years. What first drew you to the world of ABM, and why do you think it's such a focal point of the work you do today?
Well, in truth, it was an ex-colleague who said, I'm doing some consulting work for this agency who specialize in ABM, and I'm about to go and take a permanent job. Would you like to pick up what I've been doing? And this is back in 2012, I think. And I said, what's ABM? I'd literally never heard of it, even though I'd been in B2B marketing, since the 80s. So I kind of fell into it. I was fascinated by the fact that this was transforming the way companies were obviously going to market. And in the early days, I was working with companies like Oracle and EMC and VMware and Citrix, who were all obviously tech vendors, very large, complex sales cycles, dealing with enterprise organizations. And this whole idea of personalization, to large companies really resonated. And, I've been fascinated and immersed in it in equal measure ever since.
Excellent. Yeah. And as we all know, it's one of those key elements that separates B2Bs from B2Cs and makes them a much more successful organization. I think we all agree that spending time, budget and resource on companies you can't sell to makes little sense. And an account-based approach definitely helps with that.
Without question. Yeah.
So can you think of or share any key moments from your career that maybe shaped your approach to ABM as being a key GTM strategy?
Yeah, I think, as I say, in the early days, it was very much about working with large organizations who were looking to consolidate their relationships with really large customers, thinking central government, large enterprise. And it was really about that in-depth understanding of accounts and the people that were important within those, now called the buying group in fashionable modern terms. But I just thought that whole idea of building really in-depth long-term relationships based around insight and understanding was key. So that was kind of phase one, if you like. Phase two, where I think it kind of got interesting, is I went to work with an agency who had developed their own insight platform. They'd embedded Bombora into that. And suddenly that sort of opened the opportunity for looking at a larger number of companies and obviously looking for buying signals, perhaps even before the company had any conversations or engagement with them. And of course, we know that as intent. So that for me was another phase of activity. And what I've been trying to do over the last 5 years really is to build out a consolidated story where people can see how all aspects of ABM fit together. There isn't one size fits all. There isn't one form of ABM, I think, that is better than the others. A purist would obviously say true ABM is one-to-one ABM to your biggest customers and prospects. But I think there is real opportunity and real legs in the whole piece around, you might start with one-to-one and scale to one-to-few and ultimately one-to-many, or you might come at it from the opposite direction. And for me, the lights kind of went on. I created something called the full stack ABM model a few years ago of how do you really connect everything together. And I now see ABM, whether we call it ABM or any other fashionable acronym, 3-letter acronym, I see it as the glue, if you like, that has the potential to really connect organizations and potentially break down silos across different teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And that acronym is as frustrating as it is useful. I speak to so many sales leaders and the stuff that you and I do on a day-to-day basis is just as beneficial to them as it is to marketers. But the minute you say the word ABM, they think, oh, that's marketing, nothing to do with me. So yeah, I think we've had ABM, ABX, multiple different iterations in terms of the 3-letter acronym, but at the end of the day, it's that focus on the companies that you can and want to sell to, which is the heart of everything that you and I do day to day. So yeah,
agreed.
As painful as they are useful.
Well, I think if marketeers, I think if you could turn the clock back 22 years, when ABM was first used as a term, I think, people would probably prefer to have picked something else. I think we're definitely stuck with ABM as the master brand. But something I've talked about more recently is, if ABM is the master brand, we're stuck with that, then what are the operating companies? And I think ABE, account-based engagement, makes a lot of sense if you're thinking about new name, new accounts. And I think ABX makes a lot of sense if you're talking about existing customers where you want to improve customer experience and you want to obviously be upselling and cross-selling to them. And even within that, you've got things like, deal-based marketing, DBM. You've got this new, highly fashionable term of BGM, buyer group marketing. I think they're all subsets of ABM. And the only question is the language you use to talk about it internally. But it's the same approach. And at B2B marketing and within Propolis, we've even started talking about account-based strategies. And I think that then resonates, from both a sales point of view, a marketing point of view, a customer success point of view. And I think even leadership teams would get that in a way that doesn't pigeonhole it as a marketing gig, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. So regardless of whatever acronym we end up with, why do you think putting these strategies at the center of the go-to-market strategy for a business is so crucial for today's B2B organizations?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head early on, Paul. It's about focus. I think in the current economy where clearly businesses have not been having an easy time over the last few years, probably even since COVID, it's about focus. And I think it's about focusing your resources, your budget, your people, and getting them to look at the most important accounts and prospects. Obviously, if you're in an SME market and you're looking at tens of thousands of companies, then you need to think carefully about whether ABM would be the right approach for you and how to use it. But I think if you're working at an enterprise space and you're really looking at very large deals, large complex sales cycles, then for my money, ABM is pretty much the go-to-market strategy. Why would you do anything else? Yes, let's understand the total addressable market, but then let's work on or think about the accounts that are going to be most important to us, pick those off in manageable bite-sized chunks, and then think of the right ABM approach. So from that point of view, I think the rationale for it being at the heart of any enterprise organization's go-to-market strategy is about focus, and it's about maximizing your chance of success. And obviously, if you spread yourself too thin, then you just end up doing spray and pray marketing, which clearly we've moved away from a long time ago. But I think people still have the tendency to want to go back to chasing MQLs, etc.
Yeah, and it's frustrating to see. It happens a lot that you see people who actually invest the time and effort in, be it an intent tool, an insight tool, whatever, taking their time to build out an ICP, the companies they can and want to sell to. They're the ones we're going to go after. And then you see them do exactly what you said, a spray and pray advertising approach where they're hitting anyone and everyone and hoping that some of the people that they advertise to are the right people. And you think, well, in these days when you can actually be very focused on your advertising, all that time and effort to decide we're going after this group of companies and then advertise to anyone and everyone else, it just doesn't make sense. So, yeah, it's ongoing discussion now.
Yeah, and I also think people often have a way too lax definition of what an ICP is. They'll pick an industry, they'll pick a turnover, they'll pick the number of employees, and they'll go, that's our ICP. Well, if you've got 5,000 or 10,000 companies in your ICP, then I think you've got a problem, And I think what companies should be doing is they should be interrogating their own customer base and really looking at where are the accounts that are most valuable to us, most profitable, what do they look like? And then, of course, starting to think about, well, where can we find some more of those? I did some work for a client recently, and they were targeting over 20,000 companies. And one of the marketing leads said to me, do you know, Robert, last year, we made 50% of our new business target on 5 accounts. So, there's a complete disconnect between targeting 20,000 companies and making 50% of your target from 5 accounts. And that is, I wouldn't want to dwell on that one or the company involved, but I think that's indicative of what a lot of companies do. They're not focused enough, and they haven't made the tough decisions up front and got the buy-in from leadership, from sales, from marketing, from customer success as to, well, these are the top 10, 20, 50, 100 accounts that we should really be concentrating on.
Yeah, 100% agree. And you brought up another point really around customers. It's amazing how many people see this ABM approach as a demand gen function. Well, it is, but it's also very much look at your existing customers. There's upsell, cross-sell, renewal opportunities that often, this approach works superbly well in, but seems to be ignored. So lots of opportunities for organizations for sure.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, I think that balance between are we using ABM for new name, new accounts versus existing customer growth is actually a really big conversation. And to your point, Paul, I think still way too many people are using ABM for new name, new accounts. And that's back in the old days of, marketing, get us some leads. And that just drives the wrong behavior. Again, I think, where are we going to make our money as an organization in the next 12 to 24 months? What is the relative split between existing customer growth and new name, new account wins? And therefore, where should we be spending our time and effort? And I think very often marketing are given the poison chalice of go and win us some new stuff, when actually there's a huge amount of untapped potential in your existing customer base that is not being mined very often by sales or by customer success.
Yeah, Yeah, 100% agreed. Okay, so I mean, ABM's been around for a while, as we've just talked about, and for some, it's already the go-to motion that they prioritize. But from your experience, what do you see as the main differences between implementing an ABM strategy further versus maybe other more traditional approaches?
Well, again, I think it starts by asking the fundamental questions of what are we trying to achieve as a business? What are our goals and objectives? What are our financial targets? And where do we think we're going to make our money? And then I think you should be applying or creating an ABM strategy that reflects that. And that, of course, is then going to make it much easier to sell it into leadership teams and to have it cascade down the organization rather than being seen, as a marketing-driven exercise. And then I think it's not like there's a one-size-fits-all model. I think it's got to reflect the makeup of your business. If you're an organization, with 100 major customers globally, and you're not really looking to win many newer customers in the next 12 months, then that's going to drive one set of behavior. If you're an organization, with a significant installed base with a significant upside, then you need to be thinking about how you're going to upsell and cross-sell. If you've got a large sales team and you need to feed them with opportunities, then of course that's going to require scale. So in that context, I think coming back again without being too cliched, one-to-one is going to treat your most important accounts and prospects in a certain way. One-to-few helps you broaden that out into a tight-knit group of accounts within key verticals probably. And then the one-to-many play, probably using MarTech and intent engines, gives you a chance to at least look at a larger footprint. But I think that larger footprint still needs to be highly focused and managed, because you want the sales teams or your BDR teams to be able to have the bandwidth to really proactively follow up with those accounts and try and engage them. So, I think any account-based strategy needs to be sort of nuanced, it needs to be tiered, and it will probably involve a combination of all three of those approaches, depending on your business objectives, and revenue targets.
Absolutely. And on those objectives and targets, so many businesses seek instant results. And we know that's not always possible. And ABM really is a longer target area, I suppose. So how would you say a strong ABM, ABX strategy impacts overall business outcomes?
Well, I think it's fair to say that, if you're focusing your attentions on the accounts that matter, the likelihood is that you're going to see better results. And of course, there are so many case studies out in the market. B2B marketing have been running their ABM award for the last 10 years or more. There are lots of examples of where this has been extremely successful. But I take your absolute point, Paul, that everybody's in a hurry and most companies are on quarterly targets. And if you've got a 12 to 18 month sales cycle, even if you start doing some great work really quickly, it may not land in the current calendar year. It's certainly not going to land in the next quarter. So I think the most important thing is that, first of all, expectations are set as to what this thing is and how it works, and then they're managed. And then you need to be looking for wins all the way through the cycle. So, we're starting from a position perhaps where we have 2 to 5 contacts in our CRM system. How can we expand that to 10 to 20 to 30? How can we be sure we're really covering the buying group? Well, I think that should be positioned as a win. Do we have account plans and in-depth research and insight into each of our accounts? And do we have real knowledge of how to talk to them? That's a win. Creating really great personalized content and landing that on a regular basis and looking for engagement, that's a win. It's not about how many MQLs can we create in the next 6 weeks, but it is about showing that we're moving the dial on an ongoing basis. And of course, what we're looking for is opportunities coming into the CRM system where we can at least put a number next to those in terms of opportunities and pipeline created. That pipeline may not land for 12 to 18 months, but at least if we can demonstrate that we've made a significant difference, then I think, that's something that senior leadership and the sales organization would definitely see real value in. And a lot of this, I think, is about positioning. Too often, I think marketing are sort of seen as the internal service unit, and they're being tasked with things. I think we need to be really stepping up to the plate and having grown-up conversations at the top of the business about what's important and how we measure that. And if we can show that we're actually making a difference, even if the deals haven't landed, then I think that has real value.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even simple things like identifying companies that you didn't know were in market are suddenly in market. You've managed to reach them and gut them engaging with your brand in some way, shape or form should be seen as a massive win. And often it's not because, well, that's not in the pipeline yet. So I think you're right. I think these tactics that we're talking about are vital to any B2B. But a lot of people we speak to, their leadership has come from the B2C world, which is, I just want more leads. And there's still a lot of education to be done. I think probably more so here than in the States, but definitely it's an issue we're seeing.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree.
Yeah. So there's going to be many listeners on the podcast today who will be looking to get started with this, or maybe just getting started. So for their benefit, with your experience, what would you say are the most common challenges a business would face when embedding ABM into their go-to-market strategy?
Well, this might sound a bit 101, Paul, but I think the challenge I see most often is companies dive into ABM without having really defined what it means for their organization, and without having the leadership team bought in and understanding exactly what's going to be going on. So I think the very first thing is define what ABM means. Is it going to be about new customer acquisition? Is it going to be about customer growth? Is it going to be about a combination? Can we demonstrate how this really should be embedded and linked to our global business objectives? And if that's the case and leadership have bought into that, then you're going to have a much greater chance of success. Then I think it's about socializing it across the organization. So it's critical, obviously, that your marketing team have been trained and they understand what it is they're going to be doing and they're competent to deliver. But you also need your sales organization and customer success and any other key teams within the organization that are going to be participating in this to have got it. So, first of all, define it. Secondly, sell it in, as a company-wide directive, and then make sure that people are actually up to speed. Then I think the next piece is, what is our strategy? Are we coming at this from a volume play? Are we coming at it from an existing customer or new account play? How many accounts should be in our program? And how do we build this out so that it has critical mass? Once you've done that, then of course you have to get into the account selection process. And again, so often I think accounts are chosen on an arbitrary basis. Sales gave us this list, so we're working on it. Or the senior leadership team have decided that we'd really like to work with, Amex and Apple and Barclaycard and Mercedes. There's no thought or logic necessarily there. So I think having an empirical approach, certainly doing account scoring at the top end, and really making sure that you're choosing the right accounts for the right reasons. So I think all of those things are absolutely critical. I do, of course, hear so many people talking about wanting to do a pilot. But so often those pilots are almost incidental. We'll do a one-to-one program into 2 accounts, or we'll start with this vertical. And I think if it's not seen as a critical strategy for the business, the chances are if you don't get the results in the first 3 to 6 months, you just go, oh, well, we had a go at it and it didn't work. I think if you've bought into ABM as a primary go-to-market strategy, then you need to invest in it. People need to understand it's the long-term play. And that's why I think it's so important that it's sold in right from the top down.
Yeah, absolutely. And leadership buy-in is critical. And that pilot thing is, as you can imagine, is something we come across most days as well. Like, we want to do a 3-month pilot for a deal cycle, which is typically 18 months. Well, what do you really expect to achieve in that time? So getting that realism in there is really important. You've talked... Oh, sorry, go on.
No. I was going to say, for me, pilot is almost a dirty word. I mean, I think, of course, you have to build the business case. And I'm not suggesting you literally flip a switch where your marketing budget is 100% ABM from day one. But I think if you're going to take this approach, it is a strategic go-to-market strategy. And the idea that you have a pilot with a couple of accounts or as you say, a quarter's worth of activity, I mean, it's just not going to fly. So I think setting expectations and then managing them, it is critical. Yeah, absolutely.
And those getting those departments all on side and the leadership there knowing what to expect is critical as well. So we hear it all the time, and it's as old as us probably, Robert, but getting sales and marketing aligned is something of a nirvana, I think, for so many businesses. And when we think about that, how would you say an account-based approach contributes to building the stronger relationship between sales and marketing and indeed the other key departments?
Well, I definitely think it's about moving away from the old world where marketing are the people that run events, do PR, help us with presentations and generate MQLs. That's just got to be the past. So I think it's about creating an equal relationship where both teams understand the value that they bring to the party. And if you think about marketing, what should marketing's role be? Well, marketing historically has been the voice of the customer. So that's about understanding the market, understanding the accounts, probably having a strong point of view on account selection, and then obviously building out value propositions and messaging that are really going to resonate. From a sales point of view, I think, yes, of course, they own the customer and the customer relationship, but they really need to understand that, one person having a strong relationship with a handful of people is not how to build the future of an organization. And working closely with marketing to build on that customer insight, to expand your footprint within the account, to be able to create new stories, new positioning, new content that will keep the whole dialogue fresh and obviously give them the opportunity to upsell and cross-sell. So, from that perspective, I mean, if I bring it down to the real world, another client that I did some work with recently said, we've got 80 major accounts in the UK and Ireland, but we don't really know them well enough. Well, that is a role for ABM. Somebody else in another client said, renewals are a fluke. I mean, seriously, so you need to be in a position where you're making smart decisions based around where's the future of our business, what is most important to us. And, again, I think if marketing are asking intelligent questions of leadership, from the CEO down, having smart conversations with the finance team to understand where we really make our money, engaging the sales team, showing real value from that customer insight and positioning point of view, then I think any smart salesperson would want to play. And we're talking sales, but we could be talking about BDR teams who, again, often have unrealistic expectations set of them and not enough information or insight about accounts. So I think if marketing can actually empower those BDR teams, with information, with insight, with point of view, with content, with things to talk about, that all has real value. And for me, without coming out with too many jargon-esque terms, I think ABM is not just about focus, but I think it is about breaking down silos so that we have a SWAT team working across the business, looking at our most important accounts and prospects. And everybody has their role, but it should be complementary, not competitive, not antagonistic. And the other old chestnut of attribution. I mean, who gives the monkeys where it started? The whole point is we need to engage these accounts. We need to do the right things to engage them. We need to be landing the right content. We need to be having the right conversations. And at some point that will become an opportunity. It will lead to pipeline. It will lead to a deal. That's a team game. That's not about attribution that it was one team over another that started the process or closed the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sales, and marketing alignment is so critical. We hear it time again, and I probably bet that pretty much every salesperson that we speak to at some point thought they had a deal they were going to close, and then someone came out left field that they didn't even know of who killed the deal for whatever reason. And I think what technologies and advancements that we've got today is you're allowing, a salesperson may know 2-3 people in that buyer committee and may never actually speak to anyone else on that buyer committee. But if marketing are able to engage with those people, even when they're anonymously doing stuff, and align the messaging that they're getting to the rest of the buyer committee or what the salespeople are saying to the ones they're speaking to day in, day out, it just helps secure that message, and it makes it much more likely that deal will happen. So I think that sales and marketing alignment is such a critical element that often is not discussed. And I think it really is important.
Yeah. And to your point there about, who the salesperson can actually access, Paul, there was a very interesting piece of research I saw last year from LinkedIn and Bain. And they were talking about, the active buyer and the invisible buyer. And typically, buying groups were sort of 10 plus, but the invisible buyers were about 50% of the buying group. And on that basis, if the salesperson never gets exposure to these people, it could be C-suite, could be procurement, could be other people sitting behind the scenes, then how do they influence them? And very often these passive or inactive buyers are people that they might not say yes, they might not be choosing the shortlist, but they're the people that say no. And the people that say no typically say no because they're not familiar with the brand, they don't trust it, they don't feel comfortable with it, and they would feel more comfortable buying from a brand they do know, even if the technology is inferior, which sounds ludicrous. But of course, that's how we behave as consumers. We typically buy from brands that we know, that we like, that we trust. And that just puts even more onus, I think, on marketing, doing a great job with those invisible buyers by building brand, by creating meaningful content, by putting, the organization on the map, even before the buying cycle starts.
Yeah, absolutely. So critical. And I think I think having that ability to ensure that whether they're the invisible buyer or the known buyer, they're getting the same messages and insight, whether they're coming to the website, whether they're exploring stuff, etc., making sure that they're all aligned just secures that from happening. So it's really important. So, I mean, we've got to gain buy-in from those at the top, as we said earlier, if we're going to be successful with these strategies. Can you give us some idea on how companies can maybe overcome potential resistance or skepticism about ABM, especially from these leadership or maybe legacy teams?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy one. I think it does come back to we need to create a compelling story. What is the positioning for ABM and why do we need it? We need to build the business case by talking to the right people in the organization, whether that's finance or sales, to look at what's important to us. And then I think the key thing is explaining, in very clear terms what ABM is and how it's going to make a difference. And we've said, of course, the acronym may not be the acronym we want to use, but taking that account-based approach is effectively saying we want to put the customer at the center of our world, and we want to talk to them in their language about their needs, about their problems, and about how we can help them. And that's just not rocket science. It's just the fact that it hasn't really been done particularly well in B2B for a very long time. So I think really getting people excited about the potential for ABM, creating, some science behind it in terms of how do we go about creating our strategy? How do we go about segmenting our business and our accounts? And then what's the process for really bringing this to life? And I think it's really important that BDRs and sales teams and customer success understand what their role in the process will be. And even if the marketing team are perhaps the orchestrators of the program, everybody needs to understand their roles, their time requirements and what they're expected to do. So from that perspective, for me, ABM should probably be most enterprise organizations' primary go-to-market strategy. Then the question is, how do we bring that to life for everybody who's going to be involved? How do we show them how one-to-many can in fact be the new demand gen, just across a much more targeted group of accounts? How can we show them how one-to-few could actually be a really tailored version of industry marketing that's going to have real impact? And how can we show them how one-to-one is going to, open doors in existing customers and help us win major bids, RFPs, deals, pursuits, etc. And I think with all that in play, then it needs strong personalities. It needs people to really drive the agenda. And it also needs, I think, internal marketing. Very often the wheels come off when people forget what's going on in ABM, or they lose interest because they haven't heard anything about it for a few weeks or a month or whatever it might be. So I think we need to be drip feeding success, internal marketing to all our key stakeholders, probably on a weekly basis, certainly on a monthly basis, so that everybody can actually see that we are moving the dial and we are making a real difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of discussions we have with the C-suite in organizations, it's talking to them about what's critical to them. And it's normally very similar metrics, right? They want close rates improving. They want average order values going up. They want renewal rates improving. The time to close a deal to reduce. Key metrics that when the revenue leaders sit there and look at the success of a business, what makes a real difference is resolving those issues, and having an account-based approach allows you to focus on the deals that are going to close faster. They're going to close more often. They're going to be higher value. And because you're delivering value to a client where it fits really well, your renewal rates are going to go up. So I think once they get an understanding that these critical metrics to them as a business are going to be, improved dramatically by having this approach, it really does help.
Agreed. Yeah.
Totally. So we often hear from businesses that, keen to get going on an account-based motion, but maybe they're fearful that they haven't got enough resources. So on that basis, what advice would you give to someone operating, within limits, but looking to execute some sort of effective account-based strategy?
Yeah, it's a recurring theme for me as well, Paul. And I think, people go to conferences and they hear things like, if you're going to do ABM effectively, you need one ABMer for every 3 accounts. And they kind of go, oh my God, I've got 5 people in marketing. How am I going to do that? I think it's about looking at all the resources you have available and thinking about, orchestrating a team. So if you think about it, we might have half a dozen people in marketing. We might have half a dozen people in field marketing. We might have somebody in brand or industry. We're going to have some BDRs. We're going to have some sales team, a sales team. You've actually got quite a big bench there. So then the question is, where do we start? Well, let's define it. Let's sell it into the senior leadership team. Let's work out what our strategy should be. Let's think about how we go about account selection. Maybe we're not going to, launch 100 one-to-one accounts in year one, but maybe we could launch 5 or 10. Maybe we're going to look at a number of one-to-few programs, and we're going to start with a new vertical each quarter. And in each vertical, we're going to pick 10 to 20 accounts. From a one-to-many point of view, of course, that's going to be largely digital marketing. It's going to be a platform play. We're probably going to have to invest in some MarTech if we don't have it already. So I think, it's about having a really clear game plan and, of course, cutting the cloth, according to our resource and budget. And I think another thing that I often find is that companies sort of think they're going to have to do all this themselves. They want to be building an ecosystem where they have a really smart marketing agency that can do a lot of the heavy lifting. Might be more than one, but probably at least one marketing agency that can help them with research and insight, with value propositions and messaging, with content and media delivery. They're undoubtedly going to want to be thinking about the MarTech they need. And let's assume they have a CRM system and they have an outbound marketing platform. At what point do they need an ABM platform and partner? What else do they need to really make that sing? So, I think I wouldn't say start with a pilot, as you probably gathered, but start small and build, or start realistically and build. But don't assume that everything has to be driven by the 4 or 5 people, 6 people in marketing. Look at the wider team and work out people's roles and how you're going to use them most effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that understanding your goals and objectives, et cetera, is critical at the beginning. And often, how do you identify which accounts you need to go after? And I think there's definitely a strategy is important before you go putting any tech or anything like that in place. But also understanding your data, I think, is critical, because if you don't know who to go after, you don't know who's in market. In your example, let's say there's 1,000 companies we could sell to, but we're not going to be able to target all 1,000 of them. How do you decide which 100? You need to know which ones are in market and what buying signals that are relevant. Are they engaging with your brand or not, or don't they know who you are? And I think all of that is really critical. But once you've got that insight and built that strategy out, we call it a crawl, walk, run approach. You can't do it all on day one. And if you try to, you're just not going to be successful.
Yeah, agreed.
So from your many years of experience, have you got a good example of a company that maybe successfully put ABM at the heart of their strategy, and what others listening today could learn from that?
Well, I did see this question in advance. Well, of course, it's always difficult to talk about organizations who may or may not want me to talk about them. I think if you look at almost any large organization, they are now actively engaged in ABM. I mentioned Oracle and EMC and VMware and companies like that years ago. Literally 10, 12 years ago. Companies like PwC, Accenture, Google, Microsoft, SAP, all these companies have very focused ABM strategies and are clearly very successful doing so. There was one example of a company that I worked with last year, which I thought was quite impressive. And they're a large software organization based in the UK, 300 million, something like that. I wouldn't be too precise, but, significant without being a global multi-billion pound dollar company. And they're called One Advanced. They're based up in the Midlands, or headquartered in the Midlands. And I thought it was really interesting because they pivoted literally from a multifaceted business with lots of different business lines to a focused approach around a number of key verticals. And the CEO stood up at their annual kickoff last year and said, we are going to take an account-centric approach, or, an ABM-focused approach. And interestingly decided that it wasn't account-based marketing at all. It was account-based management. And that was what the three-letter acronym meant. And literally, I mean, I was at the kickoff. There were probably 600 to 700 people in the room, obviously not the entire organization, but a good chunk of them. And this was sales, marketing, customer success, delivery teams, the works. And it was our new way of going to market is through verticalization, and our new way of going to market within each of those verticals will be an account-centric approach. And I spent quite a bit of time with the various teams talking them through, okay, so what does ABM actually mean for you? What are your priorities? How would you use one-to-many versus one-to-few versus one-to-one? And each of the vertical teams had their own marketing lead and their own sales leadership, and in fact, a VP, I think, within the business. So they all adopted slightly different approaches, but the consistent core was verticalization and ABM. And then the only question was our relative focus in one-to-one versus one-to-few versus one-to-many. So I think in that context, it just was a very bold and brave approach. And of course, it was made possible because the CEO absolutely bought into it and wanted it to happen. And I won't say that's the ideal or the perfect scenario, but of course it is pretty ideal if you've got your CEO standing up at your annual company kickoff saying, we are pivoting the business away from the old way of doing things to this new way. And I'd love it if every client I talk to could do that. Of course, some people might say that's just not possible in year one. But I do think it illustrates the point, which is you need this to be a top-down initiative. You need it to be a go-to-market strategy rather than something that marketing have cooked up. And you absolutely need all key delivery teams within the business, to be MBO'd and to be engaged to make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great story. And we'd all love CEOs like that to be in all the businesses that we speak to, for sure. So the market's constantly evolving as we know, but what do you see as the future of an account-based strategy? And how should businesses, do you think, prepare for the trends that are coming?
Well, almost inevitably, AI is going to crop up in our conversation at some point, isn't it? But I still think actually the fundamentals of everything we've talked about so far are critical. AI is going to enable people to do things more quickly, and it's going to enable them to scale more quickly, I think, and certainly to personalize more effectively. So I think without question, AI is going to have a significant impact on a number of the different things we've touched on. So I think that's the biggest single what's new and what's going to change. But I do still think it comes back to the fact that for ABM to be really successful, it should be your primary go-to-market strategy. I think it needs the organization to have bought into it. I think we need to move away from the whole concept of pilots. You're either doing this properly or you're not. And then I think, there is that sort of, how do we change expectation and behaviors for people that have been used to be talking about MQLs for the last 30 years, 20 years, 10 years, to thinking much more about how do we move the dial? How do we increase our footprint within accounts? How do we upsell and cross-sell? How do we break into new accounts for the first time in a really effective way? And what do we need to make that happen? So I guess my mantra is, ABM should be front and center of almost everything you do if you're working in the enterprise space. And then the question is, how do you orchestrate your resources to support that in an effective way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're 100% aligned on that one. And AI, you're right. It's top of mind for everyone right now. And I think if you use AI for, automating all of those time-consuming manual efforts that take you away from your day-to-day, it's going to be really beneficial. We're hearing a lot of AI causing problems in the sales side of businesses at the moment. I like to call it AI without the why. So these black box AI tools are saying, chase after that account, phone these people without any insight on the why. And about 50% of the time they're going off on wild goose chases, and then sales get frustrated. They don't want to see those signals anymore. It destroys the alignment. So we all know AI is the future. I just think it needs to be, giving the insight on why AI is important is going to be critical as we go down the line.
I agree. I mean, another client, not necessarily even from an ABM point of view, but they're talking about human intelligence plus artificial intelligence. And whilst everybody's kind of freaking out about AI, and the implications from a staffing point of view or a job security point of view, I can't quite see it getting to the point where you just flip everything into AI. I think if it can help you do customer research more quickly and less expensively, great. If it can help you cut to the chase on value propositions and messaging, great. If it can help you personalize to particular personas or companies quicker and cheaper, fine. But I still think, human to brief, human to interpret, human to reality check or quality control check is absolutely essential. Because otherwise the old adage of shit in, shit out, if I can say that on one of your podcasts, Paul, I don't know if I can, then from my point of view, you just got to be really careful that it's done properly.
Yeah, I agree. And I saw a really good quote, and I'm not going to quote it properly now, but on LinkedIn, there was a lady saying that if she uses AI properly, it'll summarize all the books she wants to read. It'll, do pictures for her and all this sort of stuff, which will free her up more time to do ironing and cooking. And she said, actually, I want AI that does the ironing and the cooking to free me up more time to sit and read a book and draw my own pictures, which I thought was a really nice way of putting it. So you sound, Robert, like someone who consumes lots of content. So is there any book, a blog, newsletter, podcast, or whatever you recommend our listeners should look out for?
Yeah, I did think about this one in advance, and I've been a big fan of Bev Burgess for as long as I can remember. She's obviously written several books on ABM. Her latest book came out in March, I think, which is basically the ABM handbook. And I would definitely say anybody who's serious about ABM should probably have a read of that. In terms of content, I follow John Miller pretty avidly. Obviously, you're going to know him well from his time at OnBase, and he's always got a provocative point of view on just about everything. So I do enjoy his stuff. Obviously, there's so much noise on ABM online and on LinkedIn. It would take me the next hour probably to list everybody that I consume content from. But I'd say if you want, a really solid read, and you're really serious about ABM, then go and read the book, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah, great read. And great guest. We must try and get her on at some point, actually. I think that would be an awesome one. On that note, you've obviously been an awesome guest today, Robert. And I think actually there's probably room for a follow-up session here because we've only just scratched the surface on it. Sure. But a cheeky ask, if I can, would you be able to share the names of maybe 2 or 3 people in the B2B space you think we should bring on the show as future guests?
Yeah, again, I did obviously have a cheeky little look at, your list of questions, and I was having a think about this one, Paul. Curiously, we've mentioned 2 people already, and I actually thought you probably would have had Bev and John on. If you haven't, then I think that would be a great start. I think if I was picking from the sort of client side of things and not necessarily people, who are CMOs at a global level, but 2 names that I've seen a lot of recently and I know quite well personally are Marta George, who's at Ping Identity, who's become very proactive on LinkedIn of late. And, I started working with Ping 2 years ago, something like that. Introduced them to their current agency and still have a very strong relationship with them. And the other one is Leanne O'Connor, who's at Fluke Reliability, who again, I've got to know quite well over the years. So I think they're both opinionated. They have very practical hands-on knowledge of running teams in EMEA, and they would be interesting. If you were looking at agencies, then there's a couple of, again, not global agencies necessarily, but very smart agencies that I work with quite often in the UK. One of them is Andy Johnson, who's at Hut 3, and the other one is Charlotte Graham Cumming, who's at Ice Blue Sky. And both of them are heavily engaged in ABM and heavily engaged in AI, and obviously working out the implications of how does AI fit within the role of an agency and what they're doing for their customers. So they'd be interesting people to get on, I think, if you want some sort of hands-on practical advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for those recommendations. I don't actually think we've had any of them on yet, so I'll definitely do my best to get them on future calls. I think you've probably opened up lots of questions and future conversations for the listeners. How would you recommend people best get in touch with you after the podcast if you're happy for them to?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm always happy to talk to most people, or let's say anyone who's serious about ABM. So the easiest way is probably via LinkedIn. That's, the best place to find information about me and to contact me. If you're thinking about, or you're on Propolis, which is B2B marketing's community, obviously I'm very easy to access there. And if you're actually in the UK for any reason, then we'll be running the ABM conference in November. So you can come and see me speak and attend that as well. So hopefully that gives people a few choices.
That's really good. And I've seen Robert in action many times, and he's a great speaker. So definitely check that one out. Robert, thanks very much for today. It's been a really great session. As I say, I think we've just opened the thing rather. So there's plenty of opportunities to revisit for podcasts. But for now, thanks very much for your time today. I hope the listeners, you've all enjoyed this episode. And don't forget, there's over 500 episodes in the series, so make sure you check them out. But for now, thanks everyone for listening. And until the next time, cheerio.